Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here and start showing you guys some cool pictures. Um, get to my good spot here. Mm, um, there. All right, so everybody can see this and hear me. I'm hoping.
Mhm.
Okay, I know I'm kind of quiet, so I'll try to project. Um, Again, thank you all so much for coming. We are so excited to share this information with you. We just saw some really incredible things in Japan, and we just like that was like one of the we've been planning for a really long time and really want to get this all together and share it with you. Um, welcome to tonight's presentation, and we want to give a special thanks to our sponsor, unofficial sponsor, Family Mart, the ubiquitous, the ubiquitous convenience store that really not only helped us survive but helped us thrive because of their incredible selection of bao buns and bento boxes.
And free bathrooms.
Sweet- and sweet bathrooms. And just to kind of, give you a little context of why we wanted to do this trip, was kind of started with a trip actually we took to Switzerland to see some cultivation tools, some weeding tools that they were using on organic farms there. And just kind of like open Pandora's box of like, wow, I mean, clearly people do some crazy, awesome stuff in other countries. And once we saw some just random YouTube videos of these like, crazy Japanese awesome tools with excellent soundtracks to them, we were totally hooked, and that was it. So, like for example, here's an example. I wish you guys could hear the audio on this. I couldn't get that figured out, but um, I don't know. You're just like seeing stuff like this, where it was,
I
not
I
just
hear
like
it, Paul. I hear it.
high technology, but it was, you know, at that smaller scale. That's something that really kind of appealed to me, where I'm generally working at that smaller scale on the farms that I'm working on. And so it seemed like there'd be kind of a cool niche there. Um, and just a quick intro. I think y'all pretty much know us, but um, my background, so I'm Paul Huber, farm director at Troy Farm right now. My wife and I ran a farm, shared seasons for 5 years, small scale vegetables. I worked for a lot of different farmers before that, including Peter, who's on this call, one of my mentors and great farmer. Thank you, Peter. And that's just, I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to blab on too much. Sam?
My name's Sam Oschwald Tilton. Um, I I was involved in farming in a lot of different ways. Also learned from Peter. Another shout out to Peter. And I've gone down the rabbit hole with organic weed control for many years, and that's how I've gotten to meet some of you and met Murph. And so I'll leave it there too. And just to say the picture on the inset there, in the corner, that's Paul and I at our first moments in Tokyo after the 12-hour plane flight and time difference and people swarming everywhere. And so it was a neat place to be with a lot of new sights and sounds.
So just to kind of set the scene here, I shared why we went. But we're gonna kind of show you, who we met and the context of those farms that we were at, and then just kind of as we share different tools and techniques, put it in the in the context of these different categories: tillage, irrigation, planting, weeding, utility, greenhouse supplies, marketing, agriculture. And then just want to share with you kind of what we want to do moving forward. Besides just sharing this great information, we see there might be potential to do some other cool things and learn some new things. And, maybe y'all could be a part of that if you're interested. So we want to have that discussion at the end. Um, and also to just kind of set the scene, this kind of shows you how much ground we covered. on our trip. This was 21 days, and we visited 17 different either farms or agricultural related things, going from Tokyo to Kyoto to Osaka, Hiroshima, Fukuoka, Kagoshima there in the south, and then back to Tokyo to head home.
Um, we learned a lot about agriculture, and we'll do our best to share that with you. But it was also very much a cultural experience, and we spent a lot of time planning the trip, more time than our wives wanted, I think. But it really paid off in terms of connecting with wonderful farmers, wonderful people that spoke English, and really allowed us to learn a lot more. And so, just to take a moment to introduce you to who we learned from. On the left there at the dinner table is Kentaro and Sadi. They're both education professors. They speak English, and they actually had visited Paul in Madison a year or so ago. And so that was a great connection for us. And you can see here just a great moment of eating in Sadi's house and getting to know each other, and the culture is just wonderful. In the middle there, in those sweet sunglasses, is another Kentaro. He was in Kyoto. He was a wholesaler of organic produce. So he would buy from the farmers and then sell to the different places in Kyoto. He had grown up in Canada, and so he spoke English and was kind enough to take us kind of on his wholesale route for the day. There on the right is in the blue is Shinya, and he's an example of a young person who's moving back into the rural areas that are getting depopulated and really making these connections with the older generation and learning a lot about sustainable ag. And so he was with us for several days, kind of translating with us, and was just wonderful. And next to him is a rice farmer, Fukunaga-san. He didn't speak any English. We don't speak any Japanese, but we stayed at his house for the evening and spent a lot of time with him. Again, just a really kind person. Next slide, please. This was one of our first visits. This is Kamikura-san. She has a very kind of large community garden, or very large or very small farm outside of Tokyo. And she loved growing plants. You can see her quote there. She was very passionate about that, but even more so, she loved the community, and she really liked connecting wayward young people with her garden and giving them opportunities through that. And we had a wonderful afternoon with her, drinking tea from her garden and talking about things agricultural. And with all these people, even though the language barrier was huge, agriculture is a universal language, and we somehow started talking about compost and seeds and plant spacing. Yeah. Next slide, please. We went to a few universities. On the left, we were in the tasting room of the ice cream program, so that tour was a pleasure. And on the right there is the student fields. And so both Paul and I get to work with the apprentices in the Wisconsin organic veg program. And so it was really neat to see how they do farmer education there in Japan. Next slide, please. This was a farmer we visited. His farm plot has been in his family for about 250 years, which to us was made quite an impression that he's been on that same soil. The day we visited, he was burning his rice straw. So there on the right, you can see all the rice straw piled up. And the bran that he separated out is in piles, and he's turning it into biochar, a fertilizer. And we'll talk more about that shortly too. This is Ueda-san. He made a garden out of some unused hillside space outside of Tokyo. And he was really passionate, again, about connecting hospital patients with plants. And on the left, you can see the trellis for his grapes. And he also loved biochar, and he was starting up a biochar company. And so you can see him with his poster there, getting really excited about biochar. Next slide, please. There were some expats. There is Julia and Ken. Julia's from, I think, Australia, and Ken from Japan. And they were artists, high class conceptual artists that show art all over the world. But for them, farming was their main art. And so here on the right, Ken is showing their water lotus patch where they grow water lotus to harvest. Next slide. And here we come to the master. Faruno-san is kind of invented duck rice farming. And I think we can tell you about that in a little bit. But this is a man who grew up on his family's farm, has been farming for, I don't know, maybe 50 years. and was so kind. He spent an entire afternoon with us showing us his weeding machine, which we'll tell you more about later, and hosted us for meals and just really exuded generosity and experience and enthusiasm for farming all those years in. Next slide, please. This is Hikaru. He was a younger farmer. I think he grew up in the city, and he worked on several different vegetable farms like a lot of us have and learned skills, and then got land, and he farmed outside of Kyoto. His land was very wet and low-lying, so in his hoop house there, you can see, I think, how high the raised beds are to keep them out of the water table. Next slide. In the orange there in the picture is Takayama-san. He's a professor at the university specializing in animal fencing and also in animal grazing. And so he showed us his farm where he had many different animals, many different fencing styles, and talked about the beaks of geese and ducks and how they're different and how they're good at grazing different things. And funnily enough, his land was like in a giant bowl that flooded really easily. And it turned out that Fukunaga-san there in the black had sold him that land. So it's just really funny, one farmer selling the academic his worst piece of land. I don't think we made that joke in front of him, though. This is Hachiguchi-san in the white shirt. Again, like Faruno-san, an incredibly experienced farmer who had been on that land for generations. And like many growers, focuses on rice and then grows vegetables kind of on the side, like the vegetables fit into the rice rotation. And here you can see we're holding up some of his millet that is like an heirloom millet that he sells a mix with. And on the right, he's in his rice processing room. The Japanese are just so good at having scale appropriate machinery. And so even though Hachiguchi-san grows maybe 10 to 15 acres of rice, he has very high technology rice sorting and rice grading equipment so that he can turn his rice into a finished product. And so other farmers come to him and he processes their rice, and then they sell that rice and other goods through their consumer co-op, direct to consumer. Next picture. Down in Kagoshima in the south, we visited a consumer CSA, and we'll talk more about CSA later. But the Japanese in some ways invented CSA. And so this is Ogawa-san in the yellow vest. And she started this consumer group, I think about 30 years ago. And her son now is a general manager. And so for them, the CSA started with the consumers. The consumers get together and say, hey, we want to buy from farmers. And so we'll tell you more about that later. Next to her is a local politician who showed up to have his picture taken and do an interview and then left. So we didn't get to know him very well. And on the left is a very old farmer who we weren't able to communicate with very well, except to understand that he was extremely passionate about compost. And maybe like some of us, I'm thinking of Peter and Tenzin, who I can see right now, really kind of invested spiritual significance in his compost. And so you can see that he made it there undercover so it wouldn't be rained on. And so that was neat to share that with him. Next slide, please. After our first week or two, we were worried that we were only seeing small farms and community farms, and we wanted to do our best to see the whole spectrum of scales. And so we quickly got on our phones and started Googling farms, and we found this Osaki farm, and we could only communicate with them by pretending that we wanted to be an employee. And so we sent him a message, and he said, sure, come on by the next day. And so this is Nakayama-san, and he had been trained to be a fisherman, but decided that he liked farming better. And he had actually visited Salinas, California with his business partner a few years earlier to learn about vegetables. And so just us being American, he was really happy to have us. He grows, I forget, maybe 250 acres or so of daikon radish. That's his specialty. And the day we were there, he gave us a farm tour. And then he said, come back tonight. We're having a barbecue for the crew because they were just getting into their busy season. So Paul and I went and shaved and did our laundry. And we came back and we thought we were going to just be barbecuing with him. And the whole farm crew, mostly workers from the Philippines, were there, and they were barbecuing and drinking beer and singing karaoke. And so we had a really wonderful time spending the evening with them, and they were really very welcoming.
I'll just butt in here because this was a farm that I visited while Sam was going to a field day. So Tomoyuki and Miyabi and Makoto Guch were two. Actually, Makoto was representative from Kyuho, a company in Japan that makes organic weeding tools. And so we both went to go see Tomoyuki's fields. He has quite a bit of acreage in Kyushu and all vegetables, and he was able to demonstrate that tool for us, which you'll see in a later slide. And I just got a fun little tour of their Japanese tool museum while I was there. Just kind of a funny little thing that happened, but a great experience too.
While Paul was doing that, maybe like 20 miles away, there happened to be a big Kubota field day. And so they had big field demos, and they also had, tents and all the machines gussied up and stuff. And I did my best, because I was unaware at the time. I did my best to convince the Kubota executive that they should export vegetable machinery to the U.S. And it was probably the most impolite that a Japanese person was to me on the whole trip. They were very convinced that that's not a good idea. And so Paul and I will kind of touch on that later in the presentation as well. And here's just a little more of the field demo there. So before we jump into the different kind of machinery and things, we wanted to take a moment to kind of orient you of the agriculture there. For us, it was very different, and we didn't understand why they were growing vegetables the way they were. And finally, someone told us, guys, to understand Japanese agriculture, you need to know rice. And Furuno-san, the duck rice king, told us rice is the foundation of our agriculture, and then we apply those principles of cultivation to other crops. And so I think as we go through, keep rice in the back of your head. And what we mean by that is rice is grown in wet soil, right? So they'll wet the soil down and they'll till it very heavily. And in addition, they have a lot of rain there. And so they've channeled that rain to feed their rice crops. And the other thing is they've been on the land for so long, hundreds or even thousands of years. And so whereas here we might have hilly soil or stony soil, there, I don't think we saw a single field that was kind of subprime. The soil had, the rocks had been picked out over hundreds of years. Things had been flattened just enough to drain perfectly. Just so it was just kind of a different context. And then similarly, in a pedological sense, the texture of the soil is just, I guess we would say it's more coarse, but their soils are very volcanic based and silt based. So the soil is very light. And again, we didn't see many stones in them. And so as we go through and look at the machines, and as we think about how well their machines might work for us, I think we got to think about that because they're really designed for their situation with those lighter weight, non-stony soils. Okay.
All right. So one thing that was kind of a crazy revelation for us is just that, the Japanese farmers really had no problem tilling a lot. Some of them even talked about how advantageous it was to kind of turbocharge the soil, get that air in there, get that biological activity going, and even aid in the fermentation process. And we didn't really wanted to dig deeper into what they meant by that, because we heard that a few different times about fermentation in the soil. We weren't able to really get too far, just with kind of the language barrier, even with follow-up emails, but that's something we definitely are interested in exploring more. But you'll see in these pictures here, there's just all kinds of rototillers, all manners of rototillers that they use. And, raised beds were very common too. You just got to keep in mind that in Japan, they get a lot of rain. And a lot of the areas that what they use for irrigation is actually flooding the field, because that's the method they use for irrigating rice. And so that translates into their vegetable fields, and raised beds are, of course, necessary if you're going to be doing that kind of flood irrigation. So Here's a on the left, a power harrow, large scale power harrow that the farmer was able to. One of the reasons he liked to use it wasn't necessarily a soil conservation as a soil conservation tool. It's like, well, I can get through the field faster with this. And the tiller there on the right, it was very interesting to see he had these kind of chisel attachments going in front of him. This is, the smaller scale here, and you can see this one actually has some bed making discs on them as well. Um, and then this one here is, that kind of tractor size rototiller, and you'll see it's got a clear plastic mulch layer. And we'll get into how they kind of use that as a technique for solarization.
This was from the Kubota field day. They're gangs of tillers in a V shape. And again, because they'll either grow on wide raised beds or they'll grow on hills, like you might hill a potato, and then on top of that hill will be one row of cabbage. And so this machine was made to till in the furrows, in between the rows, throw soil up onto the side of the hill and just kind of maintain that hill contour and do some weeding. And then you can see the fertilizer hopper on there too. And this flyer we saw at a machinery dealer, and just to illustrate kind of how deeply they're into rototilling, you can see here the different types of blades. The pink one, look at the picture, it does a better job of turning the soil. The black one is more chopping. You can see they have the graph there. God knows what it says, but I'm sure something interesting. But just to say, they're huge into their rototillers, and they're not ashamed of it.
As far as irrigation, we didn't see a lot of irrigation infrastructure, and I think that was really mainly due to the fact that they had so much rain, or they were flooding their fields for the most part. But we can see some examples here that we've got. So this would be example of like irrigation canal, and you can see about 3/4 to the right in that image. There's a notch in that concrete canal. And you can kind of see that little piece of wood that's dropped into there. So basically, if they want more water going into their field, they're going to have additional pieces of wood they drop in that slot, or, just one large piece of wood to divert more of that water. That's all coming down from mountain streams. And then, there's another picture here of like a irrigation canal ditch here. This is just an incredible amount of investment by the government for the Japanese countryside. Everything is very well kind of intentionally planned and developed at this point. And then these are something we more commonly saw in greenhouses. It was kind of like an oversized piece of drip tape with a bunch of holes poked into it to get this kind of spray effect. We didn't see these in the fields necessarily, but definitely saw these in the greenhouses. They certainly had traditional drip irrigation as well, but this was more, I think, a replacement for wobblers or overhead irrigation in greenhouses. And then as far as seeders or planting, we saw some interesting seeders. I'll show you some seed tape here, and then some transplanting tools as well. I think this one really got us kind of the most excited. So basically, this picture on the right, you can see there's two kind of cylinders and then that kind of plexiglass material over the top. Imagine kind of like a toilet paper roll going on each one of those. And I believe this one would have planted 2 rows at a time. And so now picture like seed, we didn't have a picture of this, but picture the seed tape where you have, let's say, radish seed wrapped in a biodegradable material that makes a long string that's wrapped on that kind of toilet paper roll. And then once you get that tape started, planting in the ground, you just push that thing along and just plant out your field with all your seeds evenly spaced at the perfect spacing. And, no need to change your planter settings, your seed wheels, your whatever for your direct seeded kind of planter. It was really kind of quick and easy. And this particular farmer had actually sent seed to a manufacturer who took his seed, wrapped it in the seed tape, and sent it back to him. And this is a tractor scale version of that. You can kind of see, it's a little hard to see, but you can kind of see those little rolls towards the back and in the middle there. This is a little better kind of picture of it. You can see that plexiglass material. That's where the rolls would sit there.
And that was computer controlled in some ways, so that where they're laying plastic, where the holes are punched is exactly where the seeds are, and it's just synced up so that the holes get punched where the seeds are in the cedar tape.
Okay, this is the Gombe cedar, which was a very popular push cedar for planting raw seed in Japan. And, kind of like we see maybe the Yang cedar as like a cedar that everybody uses, or a lot of small scale vegetable growers use. This is what is very common on small scale vegetable farms in Japan, is the Gombe. And this is more often one row, but this is cool. This is a 2-row setup. And you can kind of see that white part is actually a plastic belt. So it's a belt cedar. This is one version of a transplanter, and kind of like you saw in the video, or actually, I don't think we've seen that video yet, but it's just very interesting. A lot of these transplanting tools do have the capability, they usually present the capability for one individual to do the planting. And they're that kind of small scale, small enough version to be able to be managed by one person. So this is the back side of it. That's where all the controls are to get it going. But as you sit on that seat, you can actually see the main controls could be controlled in between those two seats. So you can actually control the machine while you're sitting as well. This is a video that shows the underside of that and the planting action of that particular transplanter. And you can actually, I don't know if you can see that, there's actually a little bit of water that comes out of the bottom of that planting cup. Let's see, I got it too. And then I'll show a couple other videos here. Sam can give a little more context.
This was at the Kubota Field Day. So again, this is a ride-on transplanter, and you'll notice the technician is not riding on it. And what it seemed like is that their raised beds are so raised, and as far as we could tell, they were all very uniform shape, like between farms, everyone knew and just often made them the same shape. Yeah, so you can see the machine just tracks. I mean, he was getting on and off it, and the machine is just following. And then in this other video, it's the same machine, and you can see the robotic fingers that are picking up the cabbage. It looked like, say, a 72 cell, and dropping them down. So, I mean, it's essentially almost a 0-person machine. You see how the technician's just getting off and checking, and then you can see how big those raised beds are.
You have anything to say about these, Sam?
These are just sort of another example of those transplanters. So similar to the one Paul just showed you, you can see the handles there. So someone would kind of walk it to the field, and then you can see the seat that they would sit on. And this one has cups as people ride along. And one thing we notice about the transplanters is they weren't really adjustable in terms of row width. Again, it really seems like they've all agreed on this cultural system, especially for like brassicas and green onions they grow a lot of. And it's just like everyone knows it's going to be at that row spacing. They're all set up for that, and that's it. Okay, weeding. It was really neat to see a lot of different things. So some things to point out. Again, the kind of rice context and not having any compunction at all about tillage. So Hikaru-san, the younger farmer, he told us that one strategy he has with rice. Oh, and the other thing I guess we should say is Paul and I tried to visit organic farms. So most of the farmers we're talking about are organic farmers in terms of not using herbicides. But one thing he does with rice is flood the rice field, till it very much, and trying to get the weed seeds separated from the soil where they would float on top. and then drain the water out and have the weed seeds float away. And he would say that if he did this well, he wouldn't have to weed his rice. Another thing that farmer did was solarization. And so earlier, Paul showed you that picture of the purple rototiller with the clear plastic on top. We saw Hikaru's spinach fields, again, on those raised beds, about 36 inches bed top. And he had gorgeous spinach, and he said it had never been hand weeded. And he would do something like leave that plastic on for about 30 days with decent temperatures, 30 degrees centigrade. And what was interesting is he said that, again, if we understood the language correctly, what he was saying, he said that the temperatures more killed the weed seeds rather than the weed plants, which was interesting. So that was worth it to him, those 30 days of not growing to kind of make hand weeding unnecessary for a lot of those crops. And then the other thing, incredible thing for us with weeding was hawking. And if we go to the next slide, maybe. So this is that spinach that's never been hand weeded. So that was solarized, and that's what it looks like. And next slide, I think. Okay, so one of our most beautiful times there was with Furuno-san, who took hours to show us about his hawking tool. Okay, and this is his hawking tool. This particular one, he told us the name, and we said, "What? We don't get it. What must be some Japanese name? What is it?" And it's called Hitman, but he was saying it Hitaman. So he said it kills so many weeds, I call it Hitman. So, everyone's got a sense of humor, so we appreciated that. And you can see it's essentially a tine weeder. He had 3 different models, one with very thin tines for the younger stage crops, another model with thicker tines, and so on. So he had 3 models. And you can see that they have many, many gangs, more than our tine weeders. And he had experimented for years with different sizes of wire and this and that. And he was very kind to us. He wanted us to take all the measurements and make it and bring it to the US. And we said, well, if we make it, maybe we'll make it out of metal, so it's better or stronger, whatever. And he said, nope. He said, I want it to be made out of wood, and I want it to look junky. And we said, what? He said, yeah, I want farmers all over the world to feel like this is an accessible tool that they can make. I don't want people to feel like they have to buy this or something. So he's just a beautiful person. And so anyway, so Paul and I have those measurements, and we're working on making one of these tools. And so in terms of the many connections or possibilities of keeping things going, that's one of them. And feel free to keep in touch with us. And if you want to play, go to the next slide. So here's what it looks like in the soil. And here's an example, again, kind of the principle of tine weeding, but he has made his own tool for that. And he had sheathed the wires in plastic tubing. He said otherwise they would kill the crop too much. And so you can see here at different stages, if he can keep killing those shallow weeds at white thread stage, he can keep his crops generally clean. And we enjoyed staying up late into the night, drinking his homemade wine, talking about weeding philosophy. And next slide, I think we've got a video. So here you can see it's just kind of normal walking speed. And he would go up and down his fields, and that was hawking. And he just had a great attitude. He said, my wife is happy because since I invented hawking, I come home in the evenings. And he had grown up on that farm, and he just said, otherwise it was too much hand weeding. I'm never at home. And so anyway, he was really happy to show us his homemade tine weeder. At Farmer Hikaru's, who had the solarized spinach, I think this is also spinach, but this is in his hoop house. This was neat. He never hand weeded this. He used a pretty simple rake. Here's a picture we found at a hardware store, and he would just rake it just before or after emergence, and that was it. And here's an example where, sure, there's plenty of other weeds, but are they competing with the crop? No. Will they flower, and drop seed before harvest? No. So great. He got decent weed control with that rake. And then on to tractors. So these are tools from the Q-Hole company that Paul visited. We did not see any cultivating tractors where the weeding tools are suspended on the belly, like we like here because of steering. It was only rear mounted tools on these kind of really light duty cultivating tractors. And here you can see this unit was kind of just for the tire tracks. and we'll show you some more later. But if we were ever able to go back to Japan or just speak to people and learn more, I'd love to learn about why it is that they're cultivating tractors are all rear mount, and kind of what's the thought behind that, or why is it not necessary for belly mount? Yeah. So here's just another example. This was at the Kubota Field Day. The new Navi rider, I'm sure you've all heard of it. And here you can see they're spreading fertilizer in the front and, probably incorporating it in the back. And Paul, maybe you would want to talk about these because you were there.
Yeah, so this you can see these are just shovels with a couple, like, these kind of, I don't even know what you call those exactly, but this attachment in the front to break up the soil a little bit beforehand. And I believe I've got another one here. This is same setup, but has these kind of almost like tine weeders that are meant to kill the weeds more in the row here as it goes. This is actually a pretty low speed, but they wanted to take it at a lower speed just to show me that. You can see there's also kind of shovels, or I should say knives, at the very front there. And this was something that basically their kind of philosophy was to run several times. I think we've got some notes here later in the presentation about what they recommended exactly, but it was, something. Yeah, here we go. So you can see 3
Paul,
to 5 times on a crop with the shovels.
Hey, Paul.
Yep.
Hold up one sec. Tenzin asked in the chat, do those tine weeders bend in towards the row on that last video?
They do, yeah. So they actually, if you see hopefully we can see another example. They actually almost touch. And the way that those tines are made, I don't know if you can kind of see those little pieces of red. They're almost like wrapped around the tine there. You can move that little red piece of plastic up and down the tine, and what it does is it binds 2 tines together and makes them kind of more rigid as a result. So there's different things. You can actually bend them a little bit to make them overlap more. So there's kind of ways you can manipulate it to make it a little more aggressive. But yes, it is going right in the row there. And they mentioned that they can't use the tines with carrots because of slow growth, so they would only do hilling with that. But then I was kind of like, well, oh my God, you must have tons of weeds then. But again, this kind of goes back to their philosophy. That soil was actually tilled 3 times before he even sowed. So I think that was kind of the method of, flushing those weeds out, kind of like Sam mentioned before. We didn't, again, I think the language barrier was kind of tough to learn about the fertility that people were using, but certainly chicken manure was a very common one on organic farms. Some farms did make their own compost and had some interesting recipes that we're still trying to follow up with, or I should say get responses back from about how they make that compost. But crotalaria, are basically sun hemp, being a component to one of the farmers' compost piles, and local materials, certainly at the smaller scale, with leaves, rice hulls, wheat bran, oil cake, grass cuttings, wood shavings, and old compost. And this, we'll see, obviously kind of the tried and true things, cover cropping as well. And this was...
Sorry, Paul, we just got to make sure on the last slide that everyone saw that bag of clover seeds says grow your dreams. Brilliant marketing. Grow your dreams, challenge to the high tech and internationalization.
Yeah. So this is this was pretty fascinating for us. You can kind of see that chimney in the middle of is a big pile of rice hulls. And what they did here was they basically made like a biochar. It was a slow process. I don't know if you remember, Sam, how long they said that took, but it was at least half the day, I believe. Um, and that was, yeah, fairly common on these smaller scale operations. And, like at the Osaki farm in the, very large scale, very, chemical based fertilizer, they had, similar to our conventional farms here, really dialed in their fertility treatments and had really, had a lot of research to back up um, how to make the perfect daikon radish, because that was, you know, they grew very little beyond the daikon radish, so they made sure those things were absolutely perfect. And that's, just kind of like typical of the Japanese standard was these vegetables all looked very beautiful and were very high quality. But we're not actually, in relative terms, not actually that expensive. So, some of the pest management stuff again was more of that kind of garden scale stuff is what we encountered with these smaller farms of making, sprays with hot pepper, garlic, and vinegar. There was fruit that was they called koji, which is what is that, persimmon in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And their persimmon is it's great. It's like way, way better than ours. And they they actually would like put those in barrels and ferment them to make like a vinegar that they could use for fertility and for like a pest spray as well. One of the rice farmers actually on his kind of smaller scale was actually added oil to the flood water that was used and then like use a leaf blower to blow insects off into the water and they would be kind of trapped by that oil in the water. But I think, kind of more of the like practical stuff that we saw that we could see implementing here at somewhat larger scale was a pretty interesting row cover that we'll see here and insect netting on their greenhouses that was kind of interesting. So this row cover actually had, it's a little hard to see in this picture, but it actually had reflective material like it's like that kind of silver reflective material in the row cover itself as these strips, as these kind of grids, as an additional way to kind of like make, keep the bugs or just like, keep the bugs off in the first place. And this, for whatever reason, I guess the research in Japan showed that red is, the color to use to keep bugs away on these bug nettings for greenhouses. So every greenhouse had that. And we'll see.
They said that the insects could see the color red better, so it was like they knew to stay out or something.
And I guess we don't have a picture of this, but they also found that blue was the color to use for deer fencing, that was ideal to keep deer away.
He wasn't going to tell us, and then he paused and he said, "Well, I already published the paper. I'll tell you what color works best."
So we'll see some pictures here of some interesting kind of things that made their greenhouses different. But one thing that was just kind of shocking, but speaks to the Japanese culture. They were doing research at one of these universities to how much salt they could add to the irrigation water to be able to, make the tomato more flavorful. And we remember just hearing an obscene number, like to get this whatever level of flavor increase, they sacrifice somewhere up to 40% of their yield, which just kind of blew our mind. But they can sell that stuff for a premium, and people do pay those kind of prices in Japan. So you can kind of see all the posts there are are pretty tight together. I think maybe just 2 to 3 feet apart. And it was a smaller gauge. I mean, almost like an inch, I think, in diameter on a lot of
Can I
these.
interrupt?
Yeah.
I'm super sorry, Paul. They were just adding salt because the extra salt taken up through the plant would add extra flavor to the tomato.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, right? I
Okay,
know.
that's the opposite of my entire strategy. Just checking.
You need to rethink your strategy, Tenzin. So this is yeah, so I think that just illustrates kind of, these hoops tight together there. And then you can kind of see at the top there, you see that shade of cloth material. So they actually would kind of build these internal structures to be able to slide the shade cloth so that shade cloth in the middle they could actually pull out at both sides and cover the entire top area. And so that material was supported from within the structure. And then they would do that with plastic as well to hold the heat in. Um, and then you can kind of see on this, I mean, this one's just like super overbuilt. So one of the things they do with greenhouses is they plan to have to deal with months, typhoons. And so this is like so overbuilt, they could actually withstand typhoon winds. But some structures, I don't think we have a picture that shows that really, but some structures actually, the plastic is in two pieces connected at the peak, and they would actually potentially roll the plastic up from either side up to the peak and basically open the whole thing up so that wind could pass through. It would destroy the
They
crops.
have giant typhoon windstorms often enough. They got to be able to, otherwise they'll just lose the hoop house all the time.
Yeah, so they'll lose their crop in that case, but at least they'll keep the structure. And then this is you can kind of see that shade cloth at the peak again here, and again, these kind of mini tunnels that we're used to seeing as well. Was kind of interesting to see they had a heat pump in their greenhouse, which means they could potentially both heat it and air condition it. Let's see what this is.
I just popped that video in there, Paul, just to kind of show the inside.
Yeah. So you can see that plastic. That you see that's actually on a motor, so that actually can open and close as well. And these were greenhouses that were, not high tech, of course, but kind of did the job of covering grape plants because they would get so much better quality and yield from keeping the rain off.
Tenzin, it seemed like we would see like acres of those along the railroad tracks covering crops, and it seemed like it was like Paul said, just mostly to keep the rain off, not for shade in terms of fungus and yield. Supplies. This
Sorry,
was go on.
It looked like there was an extra layer of plastic underneath the first layer. Was that to create shade?
The video of the greenhouse, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like an internal shade cloth inside the structure that they could roll up and down.
Oh, okay. But the one that was just another layer of plastic was to create shade. This, I think, yeah.
Well, now you have me second guessing because it looks like a sheet of plastic that's maybe more for heat than shade. So I guess I can't say for sure right there unless you remember, Paul. Oh, you're muted. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, thanks. So I think this one's for shade, because that's not fully open, but could be open further. And then let's see here. And then, this one I believe is heat retention, because that could come all the way down.
it was really neat to see the degree that what I would call like high quality horticulture was integrated into their culture. So like when I lived in Sheboygan or now I live in Minneapolis, if I want to get like good growing supplies, that you find in Nolt's or Johnny's or whatever, I don't really know where to buy them. Like you got to order them, right? Here in America. And so even like normal gardeners, it's hard for them to get like tomato clips or even know about that stuff because you have to have like specialty, professional catalogs. And there, what we saw is there was like horticulture stores in every tiny town that just sold like vegetable growing supplies, greenhouse supplies, small packets of seed. And it wasn't really for farmers, it was for regular people because so many people garden. And the other thing is, there's many things that make it easy to be a part-time grower. So you might have an office job and grow a little bit of extra persimmon or lettuce or whatever it is. And we'll show you some examples, but they just make it really easy to sell small quantities of stuff. And so like even the Japanese Home Depot called Hands Man, they had a really fun jingle theme song. So if you would advance, Paul, everywhere we were, these aren't specialty stores, but look, he's got plastic with holes punched in them, all different types of ag plastics. You can see the harvest totes above. Next slide. Here's all different bags for packaging. Again, you don't have to order from some specialty place. It's like the neighborhood gardening store has all these things for like high quality, small scale commercial horticulture. You can see the onion starts down below. Here, look at those nice anchors for hoop houses, etc. Where do you buy a new harvest tote, where they've got it all there. So again, it was just neat to see kind of the infrastructural support. Oh, and then are you ready for a revolution in clamp technology? I hope some people can appreciate this. They just had these really neat clamps, that cost like $2 and they're adjustable and they just attach round pieces of pipe. So the people that get excited about that, I know who you are. And so anyhow, if that's some piece of Japanese technology we want to bring in, it's there.
I'm sorry, y'all. We are being very naughty here and dragging this out. So we're gonna try to get through this quickly, but I think I'm gonna skip this one, honestly, Sam, just for the sake of time.
Sure.
But I do want to kind of mention the Teike because, well, why don't you talk about I'll talk about this one. So this was actually this is a group of older farmers who had basically kind of formed their own little cooperative to harvest the koji or the persimmon, dry it, and then sell it to JA, which is basically like kind of a nationwide main distributor, which it is managed by the government there. And the JA infrastructure actually does also maintain some of these. What was the name for them, Sam?
Michi-no-Iki.
And that's, they might say farmers market. So it's not farmers market in the sense that we know, but farmers will, pre-package all of their stuff. You can see everything's bagged. And then they drop it off to the Michi-no-Iki, and they take care of all the retail side of it. So the farmer drops off, they're told what's sold, and they get paid for what gets sold, and they're told when to come back to bring more. So it's a very interesting kind of model. Certainly has a lot of benefits to it. But, what they had still in existence, but certainly less common, much less common, is the Teike, which is similar to what our CSA is. And I think the very kind of interesting thing about their setup was just how it ran. I mean, you can kind of see here that like the basically they charge a one-time membership fee of 1,000 yen, which at the time we were there, I think was, no, I can't remember if that was $70. And then 100 yen, which was like $7 per month processing fee. And then, members can pause their produce purchase at any time and start up again at any time. And as far as, basically the members themselves were doing most of the work. They were writing the newsletters twice a week, and sending them out to other members with, in this case, with this particular one, we visited 5 to 7 veggies each time. Customers come to pick up the veggies, and then someone is paid a pretty nominal fee who's a member to distribute to all the other members. But what the farmers did was they arrived on packing day to package all of the produce together. They kind of did it together and then shared a meal afterwards. And then when these customers are kind of placing their weekly order, they are able to add additional vegetables. And the operation we saw had 250 members, and they took kind of, for the admin fee of running things, they took 20% of the product sales to keep things going, which we didn't really show many pictures of, but it was shoestring is kind of a generous term for what we saw. So 20% was not really enough to have them kind of operate to full capacity, but they were definitely making it work. And they had a part-time manager there, and offered some, member benefits like cooking classes, for example.
Yeah, that we would love another time to have like a whole session on the TKs or the CSA, because it was a very different model that seems really helpful in a lot of ways of like pulling the marketing off of the shoulders of the farmer. Yeah, that was neat. Let's see. We wanted to talk also a little bit about the like culture of agriculture or culture in Japan. Let's see. Organic in general was not very popular there. The organic farmers that we talked to kind of lamented the fact that in general people don't kind of get it. And we would share what organic is like in the US, with just a lot more acceptance, a lot more customer interest. And they were really kind of jealous of that. A background thing going on for them is depopulation in general, their birth rates going down. And because of that, and for other reasons, the rural areas are really quickly depopulating. All the young people are leaving for the cities. And so there's all this land that has been cultivated and cared for millennia, centuries. That's great ag land. And it's starting to just get overgrown with grass. And so on the one hand, that's terrible. What are they going to do? And on the other hand, it's like an opportunity. So kind of like Viroqua or the Driftless area in Wisconsin, where there was a lot of cheap land a while ago. And so people, cheap kind of lower grade land. And so it was helpful for back to the land people to come in there. And so now it's very easy for young people to rent land for free. People will give you land to grow on, and they'll give you their old machinery. So on the one hand, it's really bad for the rural society, but for young people that do want to move back to rural areas or be involved in ag, it's a really great time for them. And the other thing we saw is that there wasn't a lot of farmer training opportunities. There's the university route if you want to be like an ag advisor, work for JA, be an agronomist. But in terms of like training farmers who are already farmers, there's not so much of that. It was really neat to see JA. I don't know, imagine it if like NRCS or the Farm Bureau like really cared about vegetable farmers. So they had this government organization that didn't care about organic at all, only conventional, but they just did all of these things for farmers, like all types of insurance for farmers, all types of fertilizer and tools. So on the supply side, also on the marketing side, they would buy and run the Michi-no-Iki, farm market stores. So just that JA infrastructure, even though it wasn't really available to organic growers, it was just neat to see what that looks like to have that level of like government support for vegetable farming. And then just to say it was neat to see that connection between young and old. So Shinya is a young person from this a young person who's really involved in sustainable ag, and he just knows all of these people because he wants to learn from them. So he learned duck rice from Furuno-san. he helps out the older people at the persimmon farm and just learns their techniques. So again, like it's sort of a tragedy for rural areas, but also really neat opportunities too. And then we love seeing the cartoons. So each little like county, like Milwaukee County and whatever, each region has their own cartoon character. So like this guy on the right with the miner's shovel, that was a coal producing area. Down in the bottom left, I think they grew a lot of the persimmons. There's me with my corn friend. We were up in the mountains and they had a project to like clean the water. And so anyway, so they liked all sorts of cartoons. But the other thing that showed is that they're very aware of regional specialties. So like we would go to a restaurant and they'd be like, oh, this onion is from our region. And like, oh, this garlic, if you want good garlic, you got to go to Aomori. Or, oh, we grow this kind of persimmon. Over in the other valley, they grow that garbage persimmon, but we grow this kind. So it's just really neat. Again, maybe that speaks to the length of their agriculture, but like each little area had their specific goods that they were good at, people were proud of, people would drive from other places just to get, the red carrots from Kyoto. And yeah. These are just some other flavor shots. This is a hotel we stayed in with, the capsules where we felt like sardines. And then the second half of the trip, we rented a mini camper van. And that was so that was our home for a while. That was Paul getting up in the morning. And just to kind of bring us out to where we were looking for feedback from you all. For example, here's a 1-row carrot harvester we found on the internet earlier this week. And just to say, what else is out there? Like we've been looking on the internet for years. We went over there to look at more and found more. We started trying to talk with them about how to bring these tools here, but we don't know which ones are really applicable, which ones are, going to work in our soils, and feel free to advance at one click. So just like the Yeti snow monster, who knows what other cool stuff is out there that we'd like to find. And so now we're going to kind of turn it back over to you, or try and engage you all. So we would love to share with you our ideas for next steps. And we would love to get your feedback on that, please. So our ideas for next steps, and probably there's better ideas out there, is to bring over some tools and trial them. And so our idea would be to get some money from somewhere. Maybe we'll sell a kidney or write a grant. And that's why we asked you all to fill out that survey. It looks like Tenzin's going to sell a kidney.
I got 2.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you. But just like filling out that survey gives us, the kind of data you need for a grant or whatever. But so somehow get some money, get feedback from farmers like you all about what tools seem promising. And you'll see the kind of questions in the survey where we try and figure that out. Have farmers try those tools, get feedback, and then start figuring out how to get tools for import. At the end of the day, if it's a one-off thing and it's some tool that's impossible to get and you can't get replacement parts, and it's like not really worth it. It's like there needs to be the infrastructure behind it. And so for us, kind of ultimately, what would be incredible is if we could build a relationship with someone like Kubota or some other company and show them that it's profitable for them to sell tools in America, and then, have that kind of infrastructure here. So that's our goal of where this could go, but we want to get your feedback too. And so now's the time. I think if we go one more slide, and if you look in the chat, because Dan Filius is incredible. So just like I had to battle this insect, and I couldn't have done it without Paul's help, similarly, we cannot go further without your help. So Dan just popped a survey there in the chat. And if you would take a minute or 3 or however long it takes, I think it's like 6 questions, and fill that out. And we would really appreciate your feedback on how you can imagine these tools working on your farm. And so if you wanted to take like 3 minutes and fill it out, and then we thought what we would do is just kind of have a discussion based on any questions you wanted to ask, any suggestions for how to move things forward, things from the survey, tools, etc. Kind of your time.
Yeah, so we'll stick around here. Obviously, if you gotta go, you gotta go. But we'll be around if you wanna join us after doing that quick survey and just chats. And love to chat with any of you if you have the time.
I'm still filling out my survey here, but I all the sort of scale appropriate stuff is super intriguing to me. I feel like I'm constantly operating in this middle ground. And I also am very intrigued by the fact that they embrace tillage because I have tried no-till 10 out of 10 years of farming, and I have yet to have even a 10% success on a single one. And I have all kinds of explanations for why, and I'm still trying, in case you're wondering, but I think that for what we're doing for vegetables, they're an early succession thing. They really love the tillage, and it's worth it to me to do the things that it takes to offset the damage of the tillage. And I'm super, super curious about their fertility standards and these things. You talk about like it's been in their family for hundreds of years and maybe thousands. That sort of stuff is fascinating to me because if I can, I'm willing to do a lot to be able to still till because tillage works and other things don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really glad you brought that up because, like I said, it was kind of hard to dive into those details, but I do think if we had more time and, maybe funding or, connected with the right people, I think diving into that deeper of like, you guys have been doing this for, thousands of years and see success. And, what can we learn from your high tillage systems and what is functioning well?
I do recall in a lot of farms, they loved their manure, whether it was the duck rice system, which we didn't really talk about, which is incredible, where they run the timing right to transplant their little rice seedlings and then put in little ducky chicks just at the right time. And the ducky chicks paddle around. And so they kick up dirt in the water so that less sunlight reaches the bottom so that less weeds will sprout. And they poo to fertilize the rice, and the weeds that come up, they eat. So that was an incredible system. And then they also buy in like cow manure. Some of the rates they were telling us of manure that they put on seemed astronomical.
I totally get that. We use a lot of compost. I think astronomical rates are warranted in at least in a previously depleted thing. I think you can't just like because you put on 15 tons last year, you can keep putting on 15 tons for the rest of your life. I think that's not reasonable. But I think that 15 tons for the first 3 to 4 years following a depleted soil might be completely reasonable. And I'm super interested because to me that seems easier than some of these other things. And I'm also super interested in, I mean, that level, what you just described with the ducklings sounds amazing to me. But I have also raised ducks, and I mean, it's just a place to put your money. You might as well buy a boat, like that's been my experience with ducks. So, but I think, if you know how to use them and incorporate them, there are these windows of opportunity, and it's just this level of sophistication that I'm nowhere near. But I'm really, really interested to learn more about that because I think even if it's not directly applicable, I think seeing someone having gone through the whole process and where they're at versus where I'm at as far as experience is hugely valuable. So I'm really interested in those sort of like time-tested, thoroughly developed strategies.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. were there any other like tools or techniques that really stuck out to you, Tenzin?
I mean, just kind of the ones I mentioned, and also I'm fascinated by embracing tillage because I really I believe in low till and no till, and I can't make it happen. And I feel like I've just been like slamming my head against that wall. Um, eh, and so I backed off, and I've gone to earning my right to reduce tillage. So I'm focusing on that lately for the last 5 years. Um, but it's super. I mean, tillage just it works so well, and it's so satisfying. And I mean, so part of me just feels like at the end of my life, like if I get to spend more time tilling, I'm going to be a happier person when I retire. And I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but I just like that. I love doing that, and I hate the results of every attempt to reduce it.
Yeah. I'm sure you, Peter, you probably have some thoughts on that.
You're muted, Peter.
Paul, who did you just mention?
Oh, Peter. But yeah, did you want to chime in, Mia?
No, I just was making sure you didn't say my name. I guess I can chime in that from like I haven't thought about articulating this, I guess, but from like a soil carbon perspective, I think there's pretty mixed results. No till versus tillage. There's a lot of competing research in terms of how much it matters. So, anyways, that's my only comment.
Okay.
I fully agree, but I think it really depends on the system, right? So if you're like corn and soybeans and you're going to spray Roundup and till, or you're going to just spray a little more Roundup and not till, then I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's where a lot of the research comes from. But as far as trying to reduce tillage on my farm, it's just resulted in poor yields. It's not resulted in, and meanwhile, the areas where I continue to till keep getting better because I'm adding copious amounts of compost. I'm doing tons of cover cropping. I'm doing all sorts of like, I call them absolutions. Like all these like things to atone for my sin of tillage. But I actually feel like it works really well. My experience is that that works super well, and the ground is easier to manage and just better in every way, but for the fact that I feel bad about tilling. So now I listen to the No Till Farmer podcast while I till, and that's been my newest iteration.
Am I unmuted now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thanks, Paul. Really great stuff. Yeah, this tillage discussion is really interesting. Most of the pictures that you showed, the fields were kind of flat. Like Japan is very hilly too. Are they tilling on those hillsides also?
I don't think we saw, Paul, feel free to correct me. I don't think we saw any commercial field on a hillside. We saw like gardens and things like that on hillsides, but every commercial area was flat, terrace, drained. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. I don't. I don't remember seeing any. I mean, they had, like Sam said, terrace some of those areas to make them flat, and then the Kyushu region was just overall a flatter area in the Southwest, and I think that's we didn't get to go, unfortunately, but what we've heard is Hokkaido in the Northeast is probably similar. Not that it doesn't have mountains, but I think has large tracts of land. They said, from what we heard, like fields more comparable to what you'd see in the US of like large contiguous pieces of land that were flat. And that's where that, we kind of missed out a little bit because most of the vegetable production does happen in Hokkaido.
Couple other little things. Is there any trace of what Masanobu Fukuoka did, for decades with his farm? Is there anything that's still going on with his practices?
I know that was so interesting to us because, when we were talking to Furuno, the duck rice farmer, that felt like maybe the closest thing to that kind of system, although he still did a ton of tillage outside of the duck rice farming system to get it ready for vegetables because he rotated into vegetables. Whereas I think Fukuoka really was very focused on pretty strictly rice with his rotation, if I understand that correctly. And we did ask a couple different people, like, hey, what do people think of Fukuoka around here? And like, has anybody kind of kept his practice going? And he is seen as like a very respected person, but also people generally see it as not a practical system. I think a lot of people did try to make his system work, and then they couldn't get it to work. And I don't know. From the little reading I had done, it kind of seemed like Fukuoka was in a pretty, I don't know. I mean, not homesteader, but just like small scale. Like he wasn't trying to make commercial amounts of production, from what I could tell.
It's interesting too. The not that much organic, awareness or practices. Could that be partly because maybe they don't use some of the real toxic things, like is Roundup used, everywhere?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think that would be a good follow-up question is what kind of like chemical, fertilizer and pesticides and herbicides do they use? I think we kind of assumed it was similar to the US. I mean, there's that kind of theme in general that Japan has a lot of things they adopted from US practices, but that's a very good question. And we don't really know the answer to that.
So of the tools that you guys saw, were there a couple that really stood out and saying, hey, this is something that really we should have in America?
We spent a lot of time talking about that, Peter, in the car, like hours and hours and hours. And if I could summarize, so one would be that cedar tape, either the cedar tape or that Gombe belt cedar. This is why, though, we really want to get one over here to test, because the other thing is price, right? Like if that Gombe cedar costs a little bit more than a Yang, but it's only like 5% better or more accurate, like is it really worth it to import it from Japan? I don't know. The cedar tape seemed really neat because of the precision of seeding. You could dial everything in perfectly. You never had to change seed plates, and you knew exactly what you were getting. So that seemed neat, but again, you got to have the infrastructure of someone's got to buy the $14,000 seed tape machine that turns the seeds into the tape and then, send it to farmers. The transplanters, like we showed in terms of Tenzin Point of like mid-scale machinery, the transplanters also seemed like very promising. Our biggest question there, though, is how sturdy they are, because again, just their soils are lighter. But the other thing, it's one thing to bring one of those transplanters over and it works great and everyone loves it fine. What do you do for parts? Who's going to fix it? So it's like we're really, so anyhow, the cedar tape, the transplanter. Paul, I feel like I'm missing one other one that we talked about a lot. What do you think?
I mean, honestly, the hawking tool that Furuno-san had made, I think on the surface we were kind of we're still a little skeptical of its like effectiveness, but I mean, he's a professor and he's like collected data on this tool, and he knows how to do research. So I feel like that would be an interesting one. We're actually going to work on just making one and just like try it out. And it could be one of those really cool little, like, his vision of it was, I mean, he just had such a wonderful energy about him. His vision was like, I want you guys to make this tool. I want you to like spread the plans with people. I want a lot of people to use this in different contexts and make different, designs that work better in different situations. And I think that would be fun to try. I don't know if it'll work or not, but it certainly won't be a heavy lift to make one of those and give it a shot. Clearly for the small scale farmer, that's not like a mid-size farm tool. But as we all know, that is a part of the landscape here, is that small scale. So I think that could be an interesting one to try.
If you send out the dimensions, I'd build one and try it.
Cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice. Yeah, those were the ones that came to my mind. That same thought on machinery. There's a lot of obstacles. We've been getting some feedback from someone else who's tried importing, and there's a lot of like cultural barriers there. I mean, Kubota just actually doesn't want to sell stuff to the US because they are afraid of the reputation if they can't service it, and they don't want to service it. So seems like a pretty big obstacle, honestly. But
did any of the farms you visited use the paper pot system?
Isn't that funny? Not a single one.
Interesting. Did they know about it?
They knew about it. I mean, I don't know if all of them did. I mean, we brought it up occasionally, and they're like, "Yeah, we know about that." But, I think like it seems like the reputation there is you just use that for onions, and that's like it. So they aren't really like doing it much with other vegetables. So it'd be fun to share pictures and videos with them and just say like, "Hey, here's what we're doing over here," Maybe you should like give it a shot, see what you think.
That actually strikes me as a really good idea to actually see if any of them want to come back over.
Yeah.
And then you can say, well, look, this is what we're doing here. What kind of really stands out to you as being unusual? Because they'd look at the reduced tillage things and kind of go, why are you reducing tillage? That could be really quite a valuable cultural exchange.
Yeah. Maybe JA could be one of the funding sources.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, if you can line up a couple of weeks tour, go and see a whole bunch of farmers, you'd probably have quite a few guys from over there. Yeah, really keen to come and have a look.
Yeah.
I missed a little bit there. What was the main reason Kubota is not interested in marketing to the US?
They feel like, as far as we can understand from talking to them, they feel like they did the research however many years ago of the ways that our climate is different, our farming systems, our soils. They feel like they did the research. He looked me dead in the eye and was like, why would I do that? So they feel like they did the research and that it doesn't really make any sense kind of agronomically and market-wise, that there wouldn't be a big enough market here for that.
But they're selling their tractors here.
That's right. That's all that they will sell here is Kubota tractors, and they
hand over fist they are.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and that was why, to me, if I think about an actual way to make this work, Kubota's the company to do it. They already have Kubota dealers everywhere. Like if they add a machinery line, it's all there. They can all communicate. And so to me, that's like the low hanging fruit is trying to open their minds up a little bit. But I feel like I also have to be honest with them of like, what is the market for these kind of smaller scale tools? Like how many Jang seeders get sold in a year? Maybe the market's good, but
Well, I mean, that might be the low hanging fruit on our end is to just do just a fair share listserv poll of how many people are interested in spending $4,000 on a better cedar. Whatever those numbers are, if you could just say like, hey, this is, we're talking about 5 states out of 50.
Yeah.
And we got this many people who are interested in that sort of technology.
Yeah. And that's what we were thinking too with a grant is to kind of do the work for Kubota. Where like, if we could get some of these tools here, with farmer input, so we're getting the good tools, have farmers use them, tell us what you think. Have like Dan in Iowa run, a university test on is the cedar more accurate than the yang or comparing setup time or whatever and get some real numbers. Yeah. And then like have more to either bring to Kubota or whoever of like real experience.
For sure.
Okay, guys, I've got to go, but great effort. Glad you had such a good trip. And Sam, we're lined up to talk something in a month's time. We'll catch up then.
Good to see you, Murph.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Good to meet you, Murph. Take care.
Where is this survey? How do I access that?
In the chat, I'll put it right back in there in the chat, and now it's there. And just click on the link.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks. I gotta go too.
Thanks for asking, Peter. See ya.
Thank you.
We can call it there. Thanks a lot for coming, everyone, and letting us share stuff with you.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, good night, y'all.